Great. Well, welcome everyone. I'll start and then I'll definitely turn the show over to Professor Dale. But my name is Laura Schiff. I work in the Center for Undergraduate Global Engagement, and we are partnering with Professor Dale to offer this course for this summer. So really excited to see all of you guys here today. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with you guys as well. So yeah, Lisa, take it away.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Nice to see so many familiar faces and unfamiliar faces. Also happy to have you join us. So I have a few slides to share just to give you a sense of what this course is and will be. And then, of course, we'll have plenty of time for questions, but I figured we would start with a general overview of what I have in mind. And then that will set us up to answer some questions. Okay, I assume everybody can see this. Yes, thumbs up. Okay, great. I know it's so I always hate that of course you can see it. By now we're pretty good at this, but still always feel like you have to check. Okay, so this course, Public Lands in the American West, is a course I have taught in some version for coming up on 25 years at this point. I lived and worked in Colorado for more than 2 decades, taught versions of this class out there, almost all of which included an element in the field because we lived in Colorado, we were studying in Colorado, and we would do field trips as part of the course. Then when I moved back east about 7 years ago, I've taught a couple of different versions of this class here in the East Coast at Yale University and then at Columbia, and always was wishing for a way to add a field element to this course because I think especially for East Coast students who don't come from the West, the Mountain West, don't really have a feel for it, it's very difficult to really convey sort of the majesty and the scale and the scope of the public lands in the West to students who have never been there and aren't there in person. So I am super excited that I think we have finally cracked the nut and figured out a way to make this course field-based. So let me start with this key question. Throw your answer in the chat. What do all the colors mean on this map? What are we looking at? Anybody have ideas? Throw it in the chat. Types of land designation, good guess, Andy. Mountainous region, jurisdiction of land management, no fair. Maris knows everything. Okay, here's the answer. The answer is, as Maris well knows, these are public lands. All of the colored in blobs you see on the map are public lands. You can see Alaska is almost entirely public lands. Nevada is 82% public. So these are lands managed by federal land management agencies. Most importantly, for our purposes for class, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the U.S. Forest Service. To a lesser extent, we'll also look at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and potentially state lands. I'm still trying to figure out if we're going to have time and brainwave space to include state lands in our class. But this just gives you a sense of the scope and the scale of what we're interested in for this class. So just to break it out a little bit, the U.S. Forest Service manages these lands nationwide. They are headquartered in Washington, D.C., so they are a federal land management agency, but they are a highly decentralized agency. They have offices in every state, and these are where national forests and national grasslands are located. The Bureau of Land Management is famously the largest landowner in the U.S. All of its lands are in the West. This is a map of where BLM lands are. And the Bureau of Land Management manages different types of land. They have a different mission statement, different priorities, and different laws and regulations that apply to them. Here's the National Park Service. These are national parks. They're all over the country, but again, not coincidentally, they're concentrated in the West. And you can see where these all are. My guess is for many students who are not from the West, your exposure to public lands, to federally managed public lands, has been through a visit to a national park. These are national treasures. They are international gems. People travel from all over the world to come visit the United States national parks. When we overlay those different agencies and their land base, it looks like this. This is the percentage of each state that is federal land. So you can see why studying this dynamic in the American West is essential. People often ask when I teach this class on the first day, they say, well, how do you know where the West is? And then I show this map and say, I don't decide. This is how we decide. The line of where the West begins is really clearly articulated here. So we're going to be studying the American West, where by definition, public lands are at least 30% of the land base. We're going to do our field work in Colorado, where it's about a third of the land is federally managed public land. But we will study the dynamic west-wide. So we will, in our Zoom classes, we'll talk about what this looks like in some of the other states, but our field work will be concentrated in Colorado because that's where I lived for so long and that's where all my connections are. That's the landscape I know best. So part of this class will be attention to the ways policies, laws, and regulations govern how we manage these public lands. So the Forest Service, the Park Service, and the Bureau of Land Management are managing lands in concert with and in alignment with their federal requirements, which include the Wilderness Act, the Multiple Use Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Forest Management Act, the Endangered Species Act. We will study all of these laws so that you all understand what are the guidelines, what's envisioned for the purposes of these federally managed public lands. What are they for? How can they be managed? What kind of flexibility exists? What's allowed, what's not allowed on different types of landscapes managed by different land management agencies. So the image you're looking at there is an image of wilderness, designated wilderness in a high mountain setting. It is governed by the Wilderness Act, but it is also influenced by the National Forest Management Act and all of the competing priorities over how these lands prioritize use and access. The key issues we will explore in class are a series of, I think of them as tensions. There's no answer. These are not binary choices, but they reflect themes and tensions across land use and land management in the West. For example, culturally and politically, there's a lot of interest and attention in the West toward what's called local control. And that's actually quite a specific term. It appears in the state constitutions of most Western states. But how can you have local control if a third of your land base is managed by the federal government? And how can you manage local control with federal land management with the tribal history of land use that is at the heart of how we allocated this land base when we settled the West? So that's a key part of what this class will cover, is how those kinds of tensions play out, what they look like, what they feel like, and how they're navigated. We'll also look at some of the differences between conservation and preservation. Conservation suggests use, access, extraction, but within bounds. Preservation suggests much less use, almost no extractive use. How can we understand the relative application of conservation or preservation on different landscapes in the West? We're going to look at some of the cultural elements, the history of sort of cowboys and Western culture with a lot of newcomers, especially since the pandemic began. People who move out West who don't look or act like the people who have lived there for a long time. How do those cultural dynamics play out, and how are they relevant for understanding public lands and public land management? These are the 5 main uses of public lands as spelled out in laws and policies: recreation, energy extraction, habitat protection, timber and logging, and then grazing. Now, we can't have all 5 uses on the same acre of land. So how do we prioritize and sift through these different use pressures, and who's advocating for which kinds of uses, and which of these uses have what kind of impacts on the land? Lots of questions that we will ponder in that category. We're going to look a lot also at how decisions are made about land use, with attention to the way the process is conducted, who gets to speak, when, in what format, what are the public roles for access, and then what do we think about the outcomes of some of those processes? How are decisions made? We'll look at the urban-rural divide. I think this is increasingly a theme in the US overall, but it's long been part of the story in the American West. So we'll explore some of that. We'll be visiting a rural area and we'll look at what life is like there. You'll have a chance to see it. And then, of course, sort of at the heart of all this is the landscape, which often in the West is literally a checkerboard for reasons we'll explore in class, where public land, these are the federally managed parcels of public land, are adjacent to private land, are adjacent to tribal land. Those have different authorities, different jurisdictions, different laws, but guess what? The wildlife doesn't know the difference. Wildfire doesn't respect the differences. Recreation users are often unaware of what those differences mean and what the implications are. So that creates a lot of interesting dynamics, I think, in the West. So here's a quick overview of how I envision this class going, and I'm still building it, so bear with me. We're going to do the first 2 weeks on Zoom. And I promise you, it's not because I love teaching on Zoom. It's because this creates more opportunities for more students to participate. Because no matter where you are, you can join this class. You don't have to be in New York. You can be absolutely anywhere. During those first 2 weeks, we're going to focus on an overview of the land management agencies. Again, the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. We're going to learn about those different laws and regulations that I just listed and how they apply to the different agencies. And students are all going to choose a particular controversy that they're interested in learning more about. There's no shortage of controversies on public lands. So we'll have a lot of opportunity for you to think about one particular issue that you really want to dive deep on, study in advance of the trip, gather new information when we're traveling, and then present to the class at the end. The class during these first 2 weeks, we are tentatively planning to meet Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, 3 hours at a time. We will take breaks. 3 hours is a lot of Zoom, so we'll probably have a break or 2 breaks in each of those sessions. But again, we are trying to cram an entire 3-credit semester into 4 weeks. So just the way those hours pan out, this is what it looks like. We're looking at 3 times a week, 3 hours per session. Tentatively, we're looking at Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, late afternoon, New York time, although I'm open to doing New York time evening as well, if that ends up being preferred by students. And so we may end up asking for your feedback before we make a final schedule. We'll have 2 quizzes those first 2 weeks just to assess your mastery of the material. So the first week we'll have a quiz on Thursday. The second week, again, a quiz on Thursday. So sort of 1 week quiz to cap off the week, second week quiz to cap off the week. But mostly this is a discussion class. So this is, we're capping the class at 12 for a variety of logistical reasons that have to do with travel, but also because 12 is a nice number for having conversation. We'll really get to know each other. Since we'll be on Zoom, nobody will be wearing masks. So I think we'll really have a chance to engage and discuss. Every class period will be a lot of discussion. And for what it's worth, I really hope to have an in-person kickoff the class session toward the end of April or early May before everybody disappears, so that we have a chance to meet in the flesh before we reconvene in Colorado. So that's kind of an overview of the first 2 weeks. So we sort of tee up all the content, get everybody up to speed. Then we go to beautiful Estes Park for the week of June 11th. We're going to stay at the YMCA in Estes Park, where we will be surrounded, and you can see in this image, by Rocky Mountain National Park, perhaps the crown jewel of the national park system, and we'll have an opportunity to explore it. From our home base in Estes Park, we're going to be doing field work to visit different kinds of public lands in the region. We're going to look at oil and gas, energy extraction operations on public lands. We're going to look at recreation use on public lands, conflict and use conflicts that occur everywhere. We'll have a look at and some guidance from wildlife experts. What can we say about biodiversity and habitat availability on public lands? We'll go look at a recent wildfire scar and consider the kind of impacts that wildfire is having on the landscape, what kind of policies might be deployed to improve risk. And we'll study designated wilderness. We'll go for a hike in wilderness, and I think it will change your life. So this will be the field week, and I can answer more questions about that. When we get back after the field week, we have one more final wrap up week on Zoom. We'll spend that time again, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for this final week. We'll sort of debrief and make sense of what we experienced in Colorado. Students will give their final presentations based on what they've studied and what they experienced. And we'll stick with this same schedule. This is really a super quick, speedy overview, but hopefully raised some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see each other a little better. And I am happy to answer questions. And I see some questions in the chat. I'm not sure if those are now no longer relevant, but I'll open it up. Anybody who has questions, throw them in the chat or speak up.
And Lisa, I'll just do 5 minutes kind of on
Great.
some of the logistical
Okay,
application aspects of it. Yeah, so thank you so much. I want to take this class. I'm too old to take this class, but I want to take this class. So I just wanted to go over some sort of specifics. So we do have an application for this program just to make sure that we're going to be able to know kind of which students are able to participate. And as Lisa mentioned, we do have a cap for the course. So we will have some sort of application process. It's via our website on the UGE website, and you can start an application today. We will be reviewing applications on a rolling basis, giving preference to students who apply early. So I just wanted to note that. The application includes a personal statement and a recommendation. For the personal statement, one thing I like to just mention is that we would love for students to just highlight any experience they've had in the West or with these topics specifically, just to help give us a perspective on your background and sort of what you come into the course knowing a little bit more about. But I will also say for the personal statement, this is not like the personal statement that you wrote to get into Columbia. We really just want you to be straightforward. Tell us why you want to take this course. There's some prompts in there. I would not agonize millions and millions of hours over this. Really, we want you to answer the questions so that we're able to understand you a little bit as a student. For the recommendation as well, I just wanted to note that the way our database system here works at UGE, I had designated as an academic recommendation, but we're open for that recommendation to come from an academic advisor, maybe an internship coordinator, somebody who knows you. And again, for that recommendation, this is not applying for a PhD program. This is for us to just know a little bit about you from somebody outside of yourself. So again, it does not need to overwhelm whoever you ask. That's not the goal of this recommendation, is to overwhelm whoever you're asking to do this for you. So we just really want it to be straightforward. A paragraph would be plenty sufficient for that recommendation portion of this. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is that we will obviously have a cost associated with the program. If it's not up today, we will be having the final cost up on our website later today. There is going to be a flat tuition charge of $58.80, and the tuition will also include room and board while in Colorado, in addition to sort of local transportation to the field sites while you are in Colorado. So that $5,800 will cover housing, educational costs, meals, and then the transportation as part of the time in Colorado. There will also be estimated expenses like the flight to and from the Colorado area that will be out of pocket for the students. I think we listed an airport transfer, potentially some books. So again, I'll share that link later with everybody when the budget is finalized, but that's what the costs will be. For this program, we do want to encourage students to also apply for our, what we call a global learning scholarship. That's something that will be available for this program. For students who are interested in being considered for this scholarship, we do ask that they complete their applications by March 7th, which is a little bit earlier than the application deadline generally for the program, which is March 11th. The Global Learning Scholarship will hopefully have a few funds being a part of that, and we'll hope to give partial awards. We do ask for students to talk a little bit about demonstrating financial need as part of the Global Learning Scholarship, but that does not mean that you need to be on Columbia financial aid. We just want you to talk about what your need is for the program. So anybody is welcome to participate in applying for that Global Learning Scholarship. And we would let students know about what potential awards before they would need to commit to the program. So, we would sort of let you know what potential scholarship you might get, and then you would have time to decide if you're able to participate in the program due to that. So again, just wanted to mention that that scholarship deadline is March 7th, and then the general program application is March 11th. But we will be also taking applications on a rolling basis. Yeah, Lisa, feel free to jump in if I missed anything, for sure.
It's great. Now, a
Yeah.
couple of other quick overview thoughts. One is this course, if you are a sustainable development major or special concentrator, this course will satisfy the complex problems requirement. So that may be enticing for some of you. I see a question that came just to me, but if you do have questions, please post them for the whole group to see, because other people probably have similar questions. A question that just came in is, who is this class meant for? What level student? And that's a great question. And the answer is, it's really open to anybody. I think it is probably not appropriate for a first-year student because there's no prerequisites. You don't have to know anything about the West. You don't have to know anything about public lands. That said, it's a 4,000 level course. It's an upper level undergraduate course. And so we expect upper level scholarly abilities. I expect you to be able to read and write and understand the context for this content within the range of having already been a college student for some period of time. So I think it's not a great fit for a first year. It's probably okay if you're finishing up your second year. What I have in mind is certainly third and fourth year students, although if you're a fourth year and you're graduating in May, you can't do it. So I guess I'm thinking of the rising third and fourth year students. So the second and third year students now is probably our target for this. If you've just completed your first year of school, I'm not going to rule it out for you, but you might want to set up a time to chat with me so we can make sure it'll be a good fit. It is a 4,000 level course. In terms of this direct message asks about what are the chances of getting a spot. So as we said, it's capped at 12 and we are accepting rolling admission. So there's certainly some incentive to get your application in. We hope to fill, but we don't know quite what that looks like. If we do fill, we'll start a wait list, and there's a lot of moving parts here to consider. But there is an application dimension to this program, but since there are no prerequisites, we don't anticipate being particularly, rigorous about who's allowed in. I think that's all I've got. I don't know. Other questions? Will this be offered fall or spring semesters? Not the travel part. That's for sure. I have not been able to figure out any way to do a travel course during the regular semester. So that's why we're doing a summer. I have taught the course as a classroom course or as a Zoom class in the regular semester. And it's okay. I didn't think it was great. I think we really were missing a field opportunity. So I have kind of decided that if we can make this go as a field class, that's my preference. And good question, Rachel, will this be offered in future summers? I hope so. So that kind of depends on whether we can pull it off this year. And I think if we can, and we can fill the class and we can go and we have a great time, as I know we will, then we've got some traction and it's likely to be something that I would love to offer regularly, if not every summer, then maybe every other summer. Andy, you have a question?
Yes, I have like a course content specific question. So we'll travel to Colorado. The field study work there, is that going to be in the context of Colorado, or is the course more broad to like the American West? Like, do you kind of know what I'm getting at? Like, is stuff going to be applied more broadly to other states, or is most of the course specific to Colorado?
The course is West-wide, so we'll be studying dynamics that apply to all Western states, the patterns of public lands management, conflict, controversy, dispute. Those play out in very similar ways across the West. Then we'll go to Colorado and go deep on the Colorado case. But, and so students when you choose the issue that you want to study in depth, it will have to have a Colorado connection. In other words, you can't have your project be on conserving moose in Denali, Alaska, because we just won't have a chance to go there. But you could study something like wildlife conservation on designated wilderness in the West, study that, and then we go to Colorado and see an example of how that plays out in one setting, which is the Colorado setting. So the themes, I think, are quite transferable across the West, but they look a little bit different in each place. And of course, since we'll only have the opportunity to travel to one spot, we will be a little Colorado centric. And the other piece of that is I lived in Colorado for 25 years, worked on public lands and studied them there. So most of my examples are also Colorado examples. The field field. The guest lecturers, the guests we have both in the field and on Zoom will most likely be Colorado based, with one big exception. We'll have a guest from Montana join us on Zoom at one point. So I think it's both. It's yes, West-wide, but certainly given the limitations in time and logistics, we're going to be focusing on the Colorado case.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Rex, who is the Montana guest? The Montana guest is Casey, who's a friend of mine, who's a member of the Kootenai tribe, who will be talking to us about tribal dimensions in Montana, the Flathead and Kootenai tribes, Confederated Kootenai Flathead tribes, CKST, Confederated Kootenai and Flathead tribes or something, the KCST. Yeah, thanks. Trevor.
Can one of the things that we look into possibly be like riparian rights in the West, like water rights?
Yeah, we will study water and water use on public lands. We're going to be a little bit light touch on that only because water law in the West is a separate class. It's kind of a monster. It's super complicated. And it's given our time limitations, I have to sort of pick and choose and prioritize. So we will certainly talk about water. When we're traveling, we will see water and we'll learn about some of the water conflicts and water dynamics, because you really cannot understand a public land controversy in the West without talking about water law. But this is not a class on Western water law. That's a whole other class. We'll probably tell you just enough to confuse you, is my expectation. Any other questions?
Well, great. I'm going to go ahead. I'll just end the recording. I definitely, have planned till 1 o'clock. I don't know, Lisa, what your schedule is, but
Sure.
I'm happy to stay on. And then, Lisa and I can make ourselves available for individual chats, obviously, if that's something of interest, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And then if you feel like you want to leave, go ahead to do that. Let me just do it.